What's wrong with Gordon Bennett? Let's start with who is Gordon Bennett? I met Gordon Bennett, I think, back in 2018 on ecologist and author Laura Cunningham's nature tour of Point Reyes, and he was along. I noted Gordon because he was the one that told the group about how the carbon credit program for the ranchers was a complete sham. So I was like, oh, here's a straight shooter that might be willing to tell the truth. And I had a short private conversation with him. And then I tried to contact Gordon later, asking him about his stance on the Ken Salazar promise, as he puts it. And he rejected me somewhat rudely, saying, I'm not going to talk to you about this. You already have your mind made up. Which is an interesting stance because my mind is based upon reading and taking facts and going that direction, whereas Gordon's is based upon him making a decision about what happened and using words that were never used and events that never took place to come up with his own version of history, which he for some reason has returned to spouting to the public in his letters to the editor. Before I get any further, let me thank Gordon for this, which is a portion of the violations that the ranchers have committed against their leases and against nature, which were reported by Gordon to the Park Service, and I managed to be able to read because these documents were acquired through the Freedom of Information Act. So, Gordon, thank you for calling out the ranchers that you simultaneously feel a sudden need to defend, even if it means bending the truth to defend them. But let's not forget, gee, I hope that doesn't get you in trouble with the ranchers, Gordon. In fact, why are you acting like this? Did you get threatened? Are you trying to make peace with the ever so ready to be violent ranching families out there? Because one more thing I remember from that walk, why I asked Gordon why he's gotten quiet after doing so much good work, is that his wife asked him to back down because of the heat they were getting. Heat from environmentalists? No. Heat from the people he now suddenly feels a pressure to start defending again. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? And look, when it comes to the ranchers and the ilk of the Gordon Bennetts out there, when they talk about the situation in Point Reyes, when they refer to American citizens, the actual owners of the park who pay the bills for the park, all those people are referred to as a small special interest group, whereas the ranchers themselves are referred to as Americans. Americans need a say in what happens at Point Reyes. These Americans, as they put it, have had a stranglehold on what happens out there as if it is a privately owned business. Well, it is privately owned businesses operating on public land at the public's expense. Pretty weird situation, is it not? Which brings us to Ken Salazar, Secretary of the Interior, during the time that Drake's Bay Oyster Company was shut down and a supposed promise was made to the rest of the ranchers. Okay, so first and foremost, when a rancher bought the rights to that oyster company from the original oyster company owners, that person, Kevin Lunny, who owns 4 or 5 other environmentally destructive businesses and is rich beyond my comprehension while telling you that he's just a struggling American. Well, he knew that the lease was going to end. It was a finite lease, and it was set to end in 2012. And yet, from the rancher's perspective, it was a terrible wrongdoing that the lease came to the end that it was meant to come to. And the Ranching Association of Point Reyes National Seashore got together and had a private meeting with Ken Salazar in person when he was out here. Isn't it interesting that regular citizens who actually own the park can't get a meeting like that? Yet those are the people called special interest groups. The special interest group is the ranching community. And that special interest group got a special meeting. Now, the most important part of this is that Salazar never used the word promise. He directed the Park Service to pursue something. And I actually asked Melanie Gunn about this during that painful interview that I referenced in my previous video. And I tried to nail her down. And I said, look, is directing someone in a direction to take the same thing as giving an order? Did you have any choice? And she quickly changed the subject and circumvented that whole thing. But you, intelligent people out there, can answer that question for yourselves. Is that the same thing as an order? If it were, does that mean that the worst person possible as Secretary of the Interior could say to go in and pave Point Reyes National Seashore from top to bottom, and they would have no choice except to do it? No, it does not. They definitely have local jurisdiction and decision-making ability. And I got to tell you, if that was the right thing to do, how come it took until Salazar for such a promise to be made? The promise never took place. The words promise were never emitted from Salazar's mouth. Promise is what the ranchers interpreted this as and have repeated to the public until people like Gordon Bennett have come to believe it as a fact. And unfortunately, many of you believe it as a fact as well. After all, we only know what we know. We only hear what we hear. And the voice that is the loudest is the ranching community, who have a stranglehold on the media out there thanks to their wealth and influence. Unlike the actual owners of the park, your basic citizens. But let's pretend for a moment that this was, in fact, a promise. Well, you know what? In American history, our government has been pretty keen on breaking promises when it effed the little guy and helped the big guy. So even if it was a promise, promises apparently can be broken. Look no further than Native Americans for as many examples of horrific promise breaking as you could ever hope to find. When it comes to benefiting the powerful, the rich, the influential, and that is the ranchers, ladies and gentlemen, they are not the poor, struggling people that you have come to believe that they are. They are the ones dictating this show. And when it comes to them, a promise cannot be broken. When it comes to anyone else, a promise doesn't mean much. Now, add to that the fact that this was not a promise. Add to that that Lunny left the taxpayers with another $4 million or so worth of cleanup when he was evicted, as he was supposed to be evicted. When the lease came to its legal end, and he was rightfully asked to leave. I guess this concept is tough for them, because the ranchers there learned early on that, hey, we can get paid for land and then not leave it. And then we can have the taxpayers fit our operation expenses. And as Gordon Bennett helped me learn, they can violate their leases up and down without any punishment, while basically squatting on the land. Gordon Bennett, thanks for getting noisy again. You've taken me down memory lane.